The emergency call came through the radio at 1:47 a.m. on a sweltering Phoenix night in July. Detective Sarah Martinez had been partnered with Justice, her loyal German Shepherd, for 3 years. But nothing could have prepared her for what they would discover at 2847 Mesa Drive. As their patrol car pulled up to the rundown apartment complex, the scene was already chaotic. Red and blue lights painted the cracked stucco walls in violent colors, while neighbors peered from behind curtains and cracked doors. Officer Johnson met them at the entrance, his usually steady voice shaking as he briefed Martinez on the situation. Domestic violence call turned into something much worse, Johnson explained, wiping sweat from his brow. Neighbor heard screaming, breaking glass, then complete silence. When we arrived, we found the suspect, Marcus Webb, standing over the victim Emma Rodriguez's mother, Maria. She's been rushed to Phoenix General with severe head trauma, 3 broken ribs, and internal bleeding. Martinez felt her stomach clench as she clipped Justice's leash. What about the child? That's the problem. Johnson's voice dropped to a whisper. We know there's a 3-year-old daughter, but we can't find her anywhere. Webb claims he doesn't know where she is, says she wasn't even here tonight, but the neighbors swear they've seen her. We've searched every room twice. As they entered apartment 2B, Martinez was hit by the overwhelming scent of fear, violence, and something else, the faint smell of the child's shampoo. The living room looked like a war zone. Overturned furniture, shattered picture frames, and dark stains on the carpet told the story of a brutal assault. Justice's ears perked up immediately, his trained nose detecting something the human officers had missed. Justice search, Martinez commanded softly. The German Shepherd moved through the apartment with purpose, his nose working methodically. Martinez had learned to trust Justice's instincts completely over their years together. The dog had found missing persons, located hidden drugs, and even detected explosives. But there was something different about his behavior tonight, a gentleness in his movements that she'd never seen before. Justice paused at the hallway closet, his tail lowering as he looked back at Martinez with what could only be described as concern in his intelligent brown eyes. Martinez approached carefully, her heart pounding as she reached for the closet door handle. Phoenix Police, she called out softly. If anyone's in there, you're safe now. Silence. Martinez slowly opened the door, and her breath caught in her throat. Huddled in the far corner, beneath hanging coats and behind a pile of shoes, was the smallest person she'd ever seen look so utterly broken. Emma Rodriguez, barely 3 feet tall, sat curled in a tight ball, her knees drawn to her chest. Her pink princess pajamas were stained with something dark blood, Martinez realized with horror. The child's large brown eyes stared straight ahead, unblinking, as if she were looking through Martinez rather than at her. In her tiny arms, she clutched a worn stuffed elephant, its gray fabric darkened with tears and other stains Martinez didn't want to identify. Hey there, sweetheart, Martinez whispered, crouching down to the child's level. I'm Detective Martinez. You're safe now, okay? The bad man can't hurt you or your mama anymore. Emma didn't respond. She didn't even blink. Martinez tried again, using every gentle technique she'd learned in her crisis intervention training. She spoke about the pretty elephant, asked about Emma's favorite color, offered water and crackers. Nothing. The child remained frozen in her traumatized silence, like a little statue carved from fear itself. That's when Justice took matters into his own paws. The German Shepherd had been watching the interaction with intense focus, his head tilted in that way dogs do when they're trying to understand something complex. Without any command from Martinez, Justice slowly approached the closet, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. Emma's eyes shifted for the first time, tracking the dog's approach. Justice stopped just outside the closet door and lay down, making himself as small and non-intimidating as possible. His intelligent eyes never left Emma's face as he began making the softest whimpering sounds, not distressed whimpers, but gentle, comforting sounds that seemed to say, "I understand you're scared, and that's okay." For several minutes, child and dog regarded each other in complete silence. Martinez held her breath, instinctively understanding that she was witnessing something profound. Justice slowly extended his neck, bringing his nose just close enough that Emma could touch it if she wanted to, but never invading her space. Then, like a dam breaking, Emma's entire body began to shake. The stuffed elephant fell from her grip as she reached out with one trembling finger to touch Justice's nose. The moment her skin made contact with his warm, dry nose, something shifted in the air. "Doggy," Emma whispered, her voice so quiet Martinez almost missed it. "Doggy, he hurt Mama really bad." The words hit Martinez like a physical blow. This tiny girl had witnessed the brutal assault on her mother, had probably seen things no adult should see, let alone a toddler. Martinez felt tears prick her eyes as she watched Emma slowly unfold from her protective position, her small hand now resting on Justice's head. "He said he would hurt me too if I made noise," Emma continued, her words coming faster now as she looked into Justice's compassionate eyes. "So I hid. I hid like Mama told me to when the yelling starts, but this time was different. This time there was so much red." Justice remained perfectly still, somehow understanding that this broken little girl needed him to be her anchor in a world that had suddenly become terrifyingly unsafe. His presence seemed to create a bubble of calm around Emma, allowing her to find words for horrors she should never have had to witness. As Martinez listened to Emma's whispered revelations, she realized they had stumbled onto something much bigger than a single incident of domestic violence. This child had been living in terror for months, maybe years. And somehow, this remarkable little girl and her instant connection with justice might be the key to making sure Marcus Webb never hurt another family again. But first, they had to help Emma find her voice again, and Martinez was beginning to suspect that justice might be the only one who could help her do it. 3 weeks after that devastating night at Mesa Drive, Detective Sarah Martinez found herself questioning everything she thought she knew about trauma recovery. Emma Rodriguez had been placed in the temporary care of her maternal grandmother. Rosa Martinez, no relation to the detective, a kind woman in her 60s who ran a small bakery in South Phoenix. But despite being in a safe, loving environment, Emma had retreated back into her shell of silence. The Child Protective Services office on Central Avenue had become a second home to Martinez, though she had no official reason to be there. The case against Marcus Webb was building, but without Emma's testimony, it was largely circumstantial. More troubling was Emma's complete shutdown. She hadn't spoken a single word since that night in the closet, not to her grandmother, not to the social workers, and certainly not to the parade of child psychologists who had tried to reach her. "She just sits there," explained Janet Morrison, the lead CPS caseworker, as she walked Martinez down the sterile hallway toward the family visitation room. "We've tried everything: art therapy, play therapy, music therapy. She engaged with toys sometimes, but the moment anyone tries to ask her about that night, or about Marcus, or even about her mother's condition, she just disappears inside herself." Martinez peered through the observation window into the visitation room. Emma sat at a small table, methodically arranging and rearranging colorful blocks, her face a mask of concentration that seemed far too serious for a 3-year-old. Her grandmother sat nearby, knitting and humming softly, occasionally offering Emma crackers or juice that went largely ignored. What about her mother? Has she been able to visit? Janet's expression darkened. Maria's still in intensive care. The brain injury was more severe than initially thought. She's conscious now, but her memory is fragmented. She remembers Emma, knows she loves her, but she can't remember the night of the attack or much of what happened before it. It was Dr. Lisa Chun, the child trauma specialist brought in from Children's Hospital, who first suggested something unconventional. Martinez had encountered Dr. Chun during the initial assessment, a sharp woman in her 40s with kind eyes and an unorthodox approach to child psychology. "I've been thinking about that night," Dr. Chun said during their chance meeting in the hospital cafeteria. "Janet told me about how Emma first opened up to you, or rather, to your canine partner. Have you considered that the dog might be the key to reaching her again?" Martinez nearly choked on her coffee. "You want me to bring Justice to therapy sessions?" "Why not?" Dr. Chun leaned forward, her eyes lighting up with the fervor of someone onto a breakthrough. "Think about it. Emma experienced the worst trauma of her young life, but the one moment of safety and connection she found was with your dog. In her mind, Justice might represent the only trustworthy presence from that night. The idea was so unusual that it took Martinez 2 days to get approval from her captain. Animal-assisted therapy existed, of course, but using an active-duty police dog in child psychological sessions was unprecedented. Captain Rodriguez, another coincidence in names that seemed to follow this case, was skeptical, but ultimately agreed to a trial run. "1 session," he said firmly. "And if anything goes wrong, if the dog gets agitated, if the kid gets scared, anything, you pull Justice out immediately." The first session was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon in Dr. Chun's office at the hospital. Martinez arrived early with Justice, who seemed to sense the importance of the moment. The German Shepherd was unusually calm, his typical alertness replaced by an almost meditative stillness. When Emma entered the room with Janet, her reaction was immediate and profound. Her blank, distant expression cracked the moment she saw Justice. Her eyes widened, and for the first time in 3 weeks, she showed genuine emotion, not fear or sadness, but something approaching recognition and relief. Justice, without any command from Martinez, slowly walked over to where Emma stood frozen by the door. He stopped just within her reach and sat down, his intelligent eyes never leaving her face. It was as if he remembered her, remembered their connection from that traumatic night, and was offering himself as a bridge back to the world of the living. Emma approached tentatively, one small step at a time. When she finally reached Justice, she did something that brought tears to every adult's eyes. She wrapped her tiny arms around his neck and whispered, "You came back." Dr. Chun motioned for everyone to remain quiet and still. She had positioned recording equipment strategically around the room, knowing that if Emma did speak, every word would be crucial for both her recovery and the legal case building against Webb. "I missed you, doggy," Emma continued, her face buried in Justice's fur. "I was scared you forgot about me." Justice remained perfectly still, somehow understanding that this little girl needed him to be her anchor. As Emma's whispers continued, the adults in the room began to understand they were witnessing something extraordinary. "Mama's still sleeping at the hospital," Emma said, settling onto the floor beside Justice. "Grandma Rosa says she'll wake up soon, but I think she's too scared. Marcus said he would come back and finish what he started. He said no one would believe a stupid little girl anyway." Dr. Chun carefully took notes, her hands trembling slightly as she documented each revelation. These were the first coherent statements Emma had made about the ongoing situation, and they painted a picture of systematic intimidation and threats that went far beyond the single night of violence. Over the next hour, Emma continued to talk to Justice as if they were old friends sharing secrets. She told him about the other times Marcus had hurt her mother, about the nights she had hidden in various closets and under beds, about the bruises her mother had tried to cover with makeup, and about the threats Marcus had made, specifically about what would happen if Emma ever told anyone what she saw. He said policemen don't believe little kids, Emma whispered, her fingers tracing patterns in Justice's coat. But you're a police dog, and you believe me, right? Justice responded by gently licking her hand, and Emma smiled, the first smile anyone had seen from her since the night of the attack. As the session ended, Dr. Chun pulled Martinez aside. This isn't just therapeutic, she said quietly. This is evidential. Emma is providing details and context that could transform the case against Webb, but there's something else I think Justice isn't just helping her remember. He's helping her feel safe enough to prepare for something bigger. Martinez looked at Emma, who was reluctant to leave Justice's side. What do you mean? I think, Dr. Chun said carefully, that she's going to want to tell her story to more than just Justice. And when she's ready, she's going to need him there to help her. Do it. Prosecutor James Mitchell stared at the mountain of evidence spread across his mahogany desk in the Maricopa County Attorney's office, feeling the weight of an impossible decision pressing down on his shoulders. At 52, he had prosecuted over 300 felony cases, from armed robbery to first-degree murder, but nothing in his 25-year career had prepared him for the legal minefield that was the state of Arizona v. Marcus Webb. The physical evidence was damning, but incomplete. Webb's fingerprints were on the lamp used to beat Maria Rodriguez. His DNA was under her fingernails from where she'd fought back. The neighbor's 911 call had captured his voice screaming threats through the thin apartment walls. But none of it told the complete story of systematic abuse that Dr. Chan's sessions with Emma had revealed. The problem is corroboration, explained Detective Martinez as she sat across from Mitchell's desk, Justice lying calmly at her feet. Emma's given us details about previous incidents, threats Webb made, places he hid things in the apartment. But Maria's memory is still fragmented from the brain injury. She remembers loving Emma, remembers being afraid, but can't recall specific incidents or provide testimony about the pattern of abuse. Mitchell rubbed his temples, feeling a familiar stress headache building. And without that pattern, Webb's defense attorney is going to paint this as an isolated incident. Maybe even claim it was self-defense, that Maria attacked first. The defense attorney in question was Robert Kane, a silver-haired veteran of the Phoenix legal scene who specialized in getting violent men reduced sentences. Kane had already begun his media campaign, giving interviews to local news stations about prosecutorial overreach and the dangers of using traumatized children as weapons against the accused. My client, Marcus Webb, is the real victim here, Kane had told Channel 12 News just the night before. He's being railroaded by a prosecutor desperate for headlines and police officers who are using a traumatized child's fantasy stories to build a case where none exists. What's next? Are we going to start taking testimony from imaginary friends too? The comment about imaginary friends had been a direct shot at Justice's involvement in Emma's therapy sessions, which had somehow leaked to the press. The story of the police dog therapist had captured public attention, but it had also drawn criticism from legal scholars and defense attorneys across the state. Mitchell's phone buzzed with yet another call from a reporter. He ignored it, just as he'd ignored the 17 others that morning. The case was becoming a media circus, and he knew that Webb's team was counting on that circus to create reasonable doubt in potential jurors' minds. There's something else, Martinez said quietly, her hand unconsciously moving to rest on Justice's head. Emma's been having nightmares. Dr. Chun says it's normal for trauma victims, but these are specific. She's dreaming about testifying, about telling her story to a room full of strangers. And in every dream, Justice is there with her. Mitchell looked up sharply. She's 3 years old, Martinez. The courts have never accepted testimony from someone that young. There's no legal precedent in Arizona, and even if there was, opposing counsel would tear it apart on appeal. But what if there could be? Martinez leaned forward, her voice taking on an intensity Mitchell had rarely seen. Dr. Chun has been researching this. There are cases in other states where very young children have testified in abuse cases. Maryland, California, Texas. The key is demonstrating that the child understands the difference between truth and lies, and that they can communicate coherently about the events. Mitchell pulled out a legal pad and began making notes. He'd already started researching similar cases, but the results were mixed at best. Even if we could establish competency, Kane will argue that having a police dog in the courtroom is prejudicial. He'll say it's designed to manipulate the jury's emotions, to make them side with the prosecution because of some Disney movie fantasy about heroic animals. Then we make it about Emma's ability to testify, not about manipulation. Martinez shot back. Dr. Chun has documented everything. Emma can only communicate about the trauma when justice is present. Without him, she shuts down completely. It's not about making the jury feel sorry for her. It's about making it possible for her to speak at all. Mitchell stood and walked to his window, looking out at the Phoenix skyline. The city sprawled endlessly in all directions, full of families. Like Emma's who depended on the justice system to protect them from predators like Webb. But the law wasn't always designed for cases like this. His phone rang again. This time, it was his boss, District Attorney Margaret Stone. "Jim, we need to talk." Stone's voice was tight with stress. "I've got the mayor breathing down my neck about this dog story. The defense bar is calling it a publicity stunt, and the victims' rights groups are demanding we do everything possible to convict Webb. What's your assessment?" Mitchell looked back at Martinez and Justice, then at the photos of Emma's injuries that were spread across his desk, not physical injuries, but the documented psychological trauma that Dr. Chun had carefully catalogued. "My assessment is that we have a child who witnessed months of systematic abuse and threats, who has details that could put away a dangerous man for years, but who can only communicate those details under very specific circumstances. Can we win without her testimony?" Mitchell was quiet for a long moment. "We can probably get him on the assault charges from that night. Maybe 5 to 7 years. But the pattern of abuse, the threats, the systematic intimidation that kept Maria trapped and silent without Emma's testimony, all of that walks. And with her testimony, if we can get it admitted, if we can get justice approved as a support animal, if we can convince a jury that a 3-year-old's memories are reliable, then we're looking at aggravated assault, child endangerment, domestic violence with a pattern enhancement. 15 to 20 years, maybe more." Stone was quiet for several seconds. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of a decision that would define both their careers. "Do it. File the motion. Let's see if we can make legal history." As Mitchell hung up the phone, he looked at Detective Martinez and felt a mixture of excitement and terror. They were about to attempt something that had never been done in Arizona legal history. They were going to ask a judge to allow a 3-year-old girl and her canine companion to take the stand in a felony trial. The impossible was about to be tested in court. Judge Maria Gonzalez had not slept properly in 5 days. The motion sitting on her desk in her private chambers at the Maricopa County Superior Court was unlike anything she had encountered in her 30-year judicial career. As she read through Prosecutor Mitchell's carefully crafted legal brief for the 3rd time that morning, she could feel the weight of history pressing against her shoulders. The motion was audacious in its simplicity. Request for accommodation of facility dog to support child witness testimony. But beneath those clinical legal terms lay a request that would either revolutionize how the justice system treated traumatized children or set a dangerous precedent that could undermine the integrity of criminal proceedings forever. Her law clerk, David Park, knocked softly on her chamber door. "Judge Gonzalez, the media requests are piling up. Channel 3, Channel 12, the Arizona Republic, and now CNN and Fox News are calling. They want statements about the dog testimony case." "Tell them no comment until after I've ruled," Gonzalez replied without looking up from the brief. "And David?" "No more interruptions unless the courthouse is on fire." The judge rose from her leather chair and walked to the wall where her law degree from Arizona State University hung beside photos from her swearing-in ceremony. She had been appointed to the bench at age 45, one of the youngest Hispanic women ever to serve as a superior court judge in Arizona. Her reputation had been built on careful, methodical decision-making and strict adherence to legal precedent. This case threatened to shatter that careful approach. The defense had filed their opposition brief the day before, and Robert Kane's arguments were as sharp as his reputation suggested. He cited case after case where appellate courts had overturned convictions due to prejudicial atmosphere in the courtroom. He quoted legal scholars who argued that the presence of uniformed animals could subconsciously influence jurors to side with law enforcement. Most damaging of all, he had included affidavits from 3 child psychologists who questioned whether a 3-year-old could reliably distinguish between reality and fantasy, especially after trauma. But it was Kane's final argument that kept Gonzalez awake at night. "Your Honor, if we allow this precedent, where does it end? Do we next permit therapy ponies for teenage witnesses? Emotional support peacocks for adult victims? The courtroom is not a petting zoo, and justice cannot be served when the proceedings become a spectacle designed to manipulate emotions rather than examine facts." On her desk lay 2 additional documents that complicated the decision further. The first was a research study from UC Davis, documenting the successful use of facility dogs in courtrooms across 12 states. The data was compelling. Child witnesses showed 40% less stress response when accompanied by trained dogs. Their testimony was more coherent and detailed, and most importantly, appellate courts had consistently upheld convictions in cases where facility dogs were properly introduced. The second document was a letter from Emma's mother, Maria Rodriguez, written in shaky handwriting from her hospital bed. "Your Honor, my daughter has been through hell. If a dog can help her find her voice to tell the truth about what that monster did to us, then please let the dog help her. I can't remember much from that night, but I remember being terrified that Emma would never speak again. Now she talks to that dog like he's her guardian angel. Maybe he is." Gonzalez's phone buzzed with a text from her husband. "Saw you on the news. Whatever you decide, I'm proud of you. Don't let the politics sway you either way." She smiled grimly. Politics were exactly what she was trying to avoid, but in a case this high profile, every decision would be scrutinized through a political lens. The real breakthrough came when Dr. Lisa Chun requested an unusual meeting. The child psychologist arrived at Gonzalez's chambers that Wednesday afternoon with a laptop full of video documentation from Emma's therapy sessions. "Your Honor, I need you to see something," Dr. Chun said as she set up her computer. "I've never shown these sessions to anyone outside the immediate legal team, but I think you need to understand what we're dealing with." The first video showed Emma during a standard therapy session without Justice present. The 3-year-old sat motionless at a small table, staring blankly ahead while Dr. Chun tried every technique in her arsenal to engage the child. Emma might as well have been a statue for all the response she showed. The second video was devastating in its contrast. Justice entered the room, and within minutes, Emma was not only speaking but providing detailed, coherent accounts of multiple incidents of abuse. She described dates, times, specific conversations, and physical details that no 3-year-old could fabricate. "Notice how she maintains eye contact when speaking to Justice," Dr. Chun pointed out. Her voice is clear, her memories are chronologically organized, and she self-corrects when she makes mistakes. These are all indicators of truthful testimony, regardless of the witness's age. But it was the third video that sealed Gonzalez's decision. Dr. Chun had filmed Emma during a practice session where they role-played a courtroom scenario. When asked by Dr. Chun to pretend justice wasn't there, Emma immediately shut down, becoming non-responsive and eventually curling into a ball under the table. She's not using justice as a crutch, Dr. Chun explained. He's not making her feel brave or confident in some abstract way. He is literally the neurological key that unlocks her ability to process and communicate traumatic memories. Without him, the memories become locked away where she can't access them consciously. After Dr. Chun left, Gonzalez made one final decision. That would either be seen as judicial wisdom or judicial overreach. She arranged for Emma and Justice to visit her chambers privately, away from attorneys and media, to see the dynamic for herself. The meeting was scheduled for Friday afternoon. Emma arrived holding Detective Martinez's hand, with Justice walking calmly beside them. The moment they entered Gonzalez's chambers, the dynamic Dr. Chun had described became immediately apparent. Emma was shy but alert, occasionally whispering to Justice while glancing curiously around the book-lined room. When Gonzalez offered her a juice box and some crackers, Emma politely accepted and even said, "Thank you," clearly. Then Gonzalez asked gently, "Emma, do you know what it means to tell the truth?" Emma looked at Justice, then back at Gonzalez. "It means saying what really happened, not made-up stories." "And what about telling lies?" "That's when you say things that didn't really happen." "Justice doesn't like lies," Emma said with the absolute certainty that only children possess. "He can tell when people are lying because dogs are smart like that." As the brief meeting concluded, Emma did something that surprised everyone. She approached Gonzalez's desk and said, "Judge Lady, are you going to let Justice come with me when I tell everyone about Marcus?" Gonzalez knelt down to Emma's level. "Would that help you tell the truth about what happened?" "Yes," Emma replied, without hesitation. "Justice helps me remember the scary things so I can tell the truth and Marcus can't hurt other families." That evening, Judge Maria Gonzalez sat in her home office, drafting the most important ruling of her career. Outside her window, Phoenix was settling into another desert night, unaware that history was being written just a few miles from downtown. Her decision would either protect a traumatized child's right to be heard or set a precedent that could fundamentally alter the American justice system. But as she began typing her ruling, Gonzalez realized that sometimes the most important legal decisions weren't about precedent or procedure. They were about basic human dignity and the courage to do what was right, even when the path forward was uncertain. The Maricopa County Superior Courthouse had never seen a media circus quite like this. By 7 a.m. on the morning of Judge Gonzalez's ruling, satellite trucks from major news networks lined Jefferson Street. Reporters from as far away as New York and Los Angeles had flown in to cover what legal analysts were calling the most significant child witness case in decades. The courthouse steps were packed with protesters holding signs reading "Justice for Emma" and "Children's Voices Matter," while a smaller counter-protest, organized by defense attorneys' associations, carried signs declaring "Protect due process" and "Facts, not feelings." Inside courtroom 4C, the tension was suffocating. Every seat in the gallery was filled, with court security having to turn away dozens of spectators. The front row was reserved for the key players. Detective Martinez sat with Justice lying calmly. At her feet, Dr. Chun clutched her research files, and Emma's grandmother Rosa twisted a handkerchief in her weathered hands while whispering prayers in Spanish. Marcus Webb sat at the defense table in an ill-fitting suit, his legs shaking nervously under the table. For the first time since his arrest, his cocky demeanor had cracked. The man who had terrorized a family for months now looked like what he truly was, a coward facing the possibility of real consequences. Defense attorney Robert Kane had arrived early, his silver hair perfectly styled and his confidence intact despite the media storm. He had given 3 interviews before 9 a.m. each time, emphasizing that emotion cannot be allowed to override established legal procedure. But those who knew Kane well noticed the slight tremor in his hands as he arranged his legal briefs. Tell that appeared only when he wasn't confident about a case's outcome. Prosecutor James Mitchell sat across the aisle, surrounded by boxes of legal precedents and expert testimony. He had spent the previous night making final revisions to his arguments, knowing that if Judge Gonzalez ruled against them, it would effectively end any chance of justice for Emma and her mother. The weight of that responsibility showed in the dark circles under his eyes and the way he constantly checked and rechecked his notes. At exactly 10 a.m., the bailiff's voice rang out, "All rise for the Honorable Judge Maria Gonzalez." The packed courtroom rose as one, the only sound being Justice's collar jingling softly as he stood with Detective Martinez. Judge Gonzalez entered wearing her black robes, her face a careful mask of judicial neutrality. She had been awake since 4 a.m., making final revisions to her ruling and praying that history would judge her decision kindly. The document in her hands would either be studied in law schools for decades to come or serve as a cautionary tale about judicial overreach. "Be seated," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom. "We are here today to address the prosecution's motion for accommodation of a facility dog to support child witness testimony in the case of State of Arizona versus Marcus Webb." She paused, looking out over the packed courtroom. In the gallery, she spotted Emma's aunt, who had driven up from Tucson, several of Maria's co-workers from the restaurant where she had worked, and dozens of victim advocates who had been following the case. But she also saw skeptical faces defense attorneys, legal scholars, and court officers who worried about the precedent this case might set. "Before I announce my ruling," Judge Gonzalez continued, "I want to address the extraordinary circumstances that have brought us to this moment. This court has received hundreds of letters, emails, and calls regarding this case. I have been lobbied by politicians, threatened by activists on both sides, and warned by colleagues about the implications of my decision." Kane shifted in his chair, sensing an opening. Mitchell held his breath. However, the judge's voice grew stronger. "This court's obligation is not to public opinion, political pressure, or even legal convenience. Our obligation is to justice for victims, justice for defendants, and justice for society as a whole." She lifted the document in front of her, and the rustling paper seemed to echo in the absolute silence of the courtroom. After extensive research, consultation with experts in child psychology and trauma, review of similar cases from other jurisdictions, and most importantly, personal observation of the witness in question, this court makes the following findings. Judge Gonzalez's voice took on the formal cadence of legal pronouncement, but underneath the judicial language was a passion that everyone in the room could feel. First, that the minor witness Emma Rodriguez has demonstrated the cognitive ability to distinguish between truth and falsehood, as required by Arizona Revised Statute 134251. Second, that the witness has shown the capacity to recall and communicate specific details about relevant events with remarkable consistency and accuracy. Mitchell felt his heart racing. These findings were exactly what they needed to establish Emma's competency to testify. Third, the judge continued, that the witness suffers from trauma-induced selective mutism that prevents her from effectively communicating, except under very specific circumstances, namely, in the presence of the certified facility dog known as Justice. Kane was furiously scribbling notes, preparing his objections, But Judge Gonzalez wasn't finished. The court has reviewed extensive documentation from Dr. Lisa Chun, including video evidence of therapy sessions, demonstrating that the presence of the facility dog does not coach, influence, or manipulate the witness's testimony. Rather, the dog serves as what the psychological literature terms a transitional object, a calming presence that allows the witness to access traumatic memories that would otherwise remain locked away. The judge paused and looked directly at Kane. The defense has argued that the presence of a police dog in the courtroom would be prejudicial and could improperly influence the jury. This court acknowledges that concern and has considered it carefully. Kane leaned forward, hope flickering in his eyes. However, Judge Gonzalez's voice grew firm. The Supreme Court of Arizona has consistently held that accommodations for vulnerable witnesses are not only permitted, but required when necessary to serve the interests of justice, provided such accommodations do not compromise the defendant's right to a fair trial. She lifted her ruling higher, and her next words would be quoted in legal textbooks for generations to come. Therefore, it is the ruling of this court that the prosecution's motion is granted, subject to the following strict conditions. The courtroom exploded. Victim advocates cheered, while defense attorneys shouted objections. Kane leaped to his feet, his face red with anger, screaming, "Your Honor, I object. This is a travesty of justice." Over the din of voices, Judge Gonzalez banged her gavel repeatedly, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Order! I will have order in my courtroom." As the noise gradually subsided, she continued reading her conditions. The facility dog will wear no law enforcement insignia. The dog will be positioned away from the jury's direct view. The witness's interaction with the dog will be limited to what is necessary for testimony. Any attempt to use the dog's presence for dramatic effect will result in immediate removal. Webb's face had gone pale as chalk. For the first time, he seemed to understand that his victim, a 3-year-old girl he had tried to silence through fear, was going to have her day in court. Furthermore, Judge Gonzalez concluded, "I am ordering a competency hearing to be held in 3 days, during which the witness will demonstrate her ability to testify truthfully and coherently. Only if she passes this hearing will she be permitted to testify at trial." As the judge's gavel fell one final time, Detective Martinez looked down at Justice, who had remained perfectly calm throughout the chaos. A German shepherd looked back at her with those intelligent eyes that seemed to understand the magnitude of what had just happened. History had been made, but the real test was still to come. 3 days after Judge Gonzalez's historic ruling, the competency hearing arrived with all the weight of a Supreme Court case. Emma had passed her preliminary evaluation with flying colors, demonstrating to court-appointed psychologist Dr. Patricia Williams that she could distinguish between truth and lies, understood the importance of telling the truth in court, and could recall events with startling accuracy, but only when justice was present. The morning of the hearing, Detective Martinez found herself in the courthouse bathroom at 7:30 a.m., splashing cold water on her face and trying to calm her nerves. In 3 years of partnership, she had never seen Justice as focused as he was. That morning, the German shepherd seemed to understand that everything they had worked toward, all those therapy sessions, all those gentle conversations with a traumatized little girl, was about to be tested in the most formal setting possible. "You ready for this, boy?" she whispered to Justice as they walked through the courthouse corridors. His ears perked up at the familiar sound of her voice, and he looked at her with those intelligent brown eyes that had seen so much pain, but somehow maintained their capacity for compassion. Emma arrived with her grandmother Rosa, who had spent the previous night teaching the little girl a simple prayer in Spanish. "For courage, Mia," Rosa had whispered. "Sometimes we need God's help to be brave." Emma wore a simple blue dress that her grandmother had bought specially for the occasion, and she clutched a small photo of her mother, who was still recovering in the hospital, but had insisted on being present via video link. The competency. Hearing would be closed to the public, but the legal implications were enormous. If Emma failed to demonstrate that she could testify coherently and truthfully, the case against Webb would essentially collapse. Prosecutor Mitchell had prepared for weeks, working with Dr. Chun to develop age-appropriate questions that wouldn't re-traumatize Emma while still establishing her competency. Defense attorney Kane had his own strategy. He planned to demonstrate that Emma's testimony was unreliable, coached, or fabricated. He had prepared questions designed to confuse a 3-year-old, to show inconsistencies in her memory, and to prove that her dependence on justice made her testimony inherently unreliable. At exactly 9 a.m., they entered the smaller ceremonial courtroom that Judge Gonzalez had chosen for the hearing. The intimate setting with only the essential legal personnel present was designed to minimize Emma's stress while still maintaining the formal requirements of a legal proceeding. Emma walked into the courtroom, holding Detective Martinez's hand, her eyes immediately scanning the room until they found Justice. The moment she saw him, her posture straightened and some of the tension left her small shoulders. Justice, wearing a simple blue vest instead of his usual police gear per the judge's ruling, walked calmly to a designated spot near the witness stand. "Good morning, Emma," Judge Gonzalez said gently. Her usually formal judicial tone softened for the occasion. "Do you remember me from when we met in my office?" Emma nodded, then looked at Justice before speaking. "You're the judge lady. You have lots of books." A small smile crossed Judge Gonzalez's face. "That's right. I do have lots of books. Emma, we're going to ask you some questions this morning, and I want you to answer as honestly as you can. Do you understand what it means to tell the truth?" Emma's response was immediate and clear. "It means saying what really happened, not pretend stories." "And what happens if someone tells a lie in court?" "They get in trouble because lying is wrong, especially to judges and juries." For the next 20 minutes, Prosecutor Mitchell led Emma through a series of carefully crafted questions designed to establish her competency. Emma answered each one clearly, occasionally looking at Justice for reassurance, but never appearing to be coached or prompted by the dog's presence. Then came the crucial moment. Mitchell began asking about the night of the attack. "Emma, do you remember a scary night when someone hurt your mommy?" Emma's demeanor immediately changed. Her small hands clenched into fists, and she looked directly at Justice. The dog remained perfectly still, but something in his posture conveyed attentiveness and support. "Yes," Emma whispered, then cleared her throat and spoke louder. "Marcus hurt Mama really bad. There was blood on her face, and she was crying." "Where were you when this happened?" "I was hiding in the closet like Mama taught me to do when the yelling starts." But this time was different. This time he didn't just yell. The room was absolutely silent, except for the soft scratch of the court reporter's fingers on her stenotype machine. Emma continued, her voice growing stronger as she spoke to Justice. He hit her with a lamp from the table, a pretty one with flowers on it. Then he kicked her in the tummy when she was on the floor. Judge Gonzalez watched carefully as Emma recounted the events. The child's testimony was remarkably consistent with the physical evidence, but more importantly, her demeanor showed all. The signs of truthful recall, eye contact, consistent body language, and age-appropriate emotional responses. Then came Kane's turn to cross-examine, and everyone in the room held their breath. "Emma," Kane began, his voice attempting to sound friendly, but carrying an undertone that made Justice's ears perk up slightly. "You like that doggy a lot, don't you?" "Yes, Justice is my friend." "And you want to make Justice happy by saying the right things, don't you?" Emma looked confused for a moment, then looked at Justice before responding. "Justice likes it when people tell the truth." He doesn't. Like lies, Kane pressed harder. But Emma, sometimes little girls imagine things that didn't really happen. Are you sure you're not imagining some of these scary stories? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Emma looked at Kane for a long moment, then at Justice, then back at Kane. When she spoke, her voice carried a certainty that belied her 3 years of age. I'm not imagining. I saw it with my eyes and heard it with my ears. Marcus is a bad man who hurts people, and Justice knows I'm telling the truth because dogs can smell lies. The simplicity and conviction of her response stunned everyone in the courtroom. Kane tried several more approaches, attempting to find inconsistencies or confusion in Emma's testimony. But each question was met with clear, consistent responses that aligned perfectly with the physical evidence. Finally, Judge Gonzalez called for a brief recess. Emma was escorted out of the courtroom, and the adults were left to contemplate what they had just witnessed. Your Honor, Kane said during the recess, his usual confidence notably shaken. I move that this entire proceeding be declared inadmissible. The child is clearly coached, and, Mr. Kane, Judge Gonzalez interrupted. I have been observing witnesses for 30 years. That child just gave some of the most credible testimony I have ever heard, regardless of age. Her responses were spontaneous, consistent, and aligned with documented evidence. When court reconvened, Judge Gonzalez delivered her ruling on Emma's competency. Based on the witness's demonstrated ability to distinguish truth from falsehood, her consistent and detailed recall of events, and her clear communication skills, I hereby find that Emma Rodriguez is competent to testify in this case. The real trial could now begin. As they left the courthouse that morning, Emma skipped alongside Justice, her hand resting on his head. She had no idea that she had just made legal history, or that her courage would inspire changes in courtrooms across the country. All she knew was that she had told the truth. Justice had been there to help her, and soon the bad man who hurt her mama would have to answer for what he had done. The moment of truth had arrived, and a 3-year-old girl, with the help of her faithful companion, had proven that even the smallest voices could speak with the power of justice itself. The morning of Emma's testimony dawned gray and overcast, as if the Phoenix sky itself understood the gravity of what was about to unfold. Outside the Maricopa County Superior Courthouse, news vans lined the street like modern-day covered wagons, their satellite dishes reaching toward the heavens in search of signals that would carry this unprecedented moment to millions of viewers across the nation. Inside courtroom 4C, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Every seat was filled despite the strict media limitations Judge Gonzalez had imposed. Legal scholars from universities across the country sat alongside victim advocates, child psychologists, and court officers who had requested permission to witness history in the making. The gallery buzzed with whispered conversations about precedent, justice, and the courage of a little girl who was about to face her monster. At the defense table, Marcus Webb sat rigid in his chair, his hands cuffed beneath the table after he had made threats during a pre-trial hearing. The cocky demeanor that had carried him through months of legal proceedings had evaporated completely. His court-appointed psychiatrist had described him as increasingly agitated and paranoid, as the reality of facing his 3-year-old victim in court became imminent. Defense attorney Robert Kane had spent the previous night in his office, surrounded by law books and empty coffee cups, desperately searching for any procedural error that could derail the proceedings. His reputation as one of Phoenix's most ruthless defense attorneys was built on finding technicalities and exploiting weaknesses in prosecution cases. But this case was unlike anything he had encountered. How do you cross-examine a 3-year-old whose only crime was witnessing unspeakable violence? Prosecutor James Mitchell arrived at court carrying a briefcase that contained the hopes of every child who had ever been silenced by fear. His opening statement had been rewritten 17 times, each version attempting to balance the need for justice with respect for Emma's innocence. The weight of prosecuting Arizona's first case, involving such a young witness, sat heavily on his shoulders. At 9:15 a.m., the moment everyone had been waiting for arrived. The courtroom doors opened, and Detective Martinez entered with Emma Rodriguez and Justice. The little girl wore a simple white dress with small blue flowers, chosen by her grandmother. Because flores represent hope, Rosa had explained. Her dark hair was pulled back with a blue ribbon that matched Justice's therapy dog vest. The transformation in Emma when she saw Justice was immediate and profound. The nervous child who had clung to Martinez's hand in the hallway, straightened her shoulders, and walked with purpose toward the witness stand. Justice, responding to some invisible signal, positioned himself exactly where Judge Gonzalez had designated, close enough for Emma to see and draw comfort from his presence, but far enough from the jury that his influence would be minimal. "Your Honor," Prosecutor Mitchell began, his voice carrying the weight of history. "The state calls Emma Rodriguez to the stand." The courtroom fell into a silence so complete that the only sound was Emma's small shoes tapping against the marble floor as she approached the witness box. Court bailiff Sandra Williams had practiced this moment with Emma during preparation sessions, showing her how to use the small step stool that had been specially installed for this testimony. As Emma settled into the witness chair, her feet barely reaching the footrest, even with the adjustments, she looked around the courtroom with wide eyes that took in the packed gallery. The jury box filled with 12 attentive adults, and finally, Marcus Webb himself. For just a moment, fear flickered across her features, and she turned instinctively toward Justice. The German shepherd had positioned himself perfectly, sitting at attention with his calm, intelligent eyes focused entirely on Emma. His presence seemed to create an invisible bubble of safety around the little girl, and those watching could see her visible relaxation as she made eye contact with her four-legged guardian. Judge Gonzalez leaned forward slightly, her voice gentle but clear. "Emma, do you promise to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" Emma's response was immediate and strong. "Yes, Your Honor. Justice taught me that truth is the most important thing in the whole world." Mitchell approached the witness stand with the careful movements of someone who understood that this moment would define not only this case, but potentially the future of child testimony in American courts. "Emma," he began softly, "I want you to tell the jury about the night when Marcus hurt your mama." For a heartbeat, the courtroom held its collective breath. Then Emma turned slightly toward Justice, and something extraordinary happened. A traumatized, silent child who had hidden in closets became a clear-eyed witness whose words would burn themselves into the memory of everyone present. "It was nighttime, and I was supposed to be sleeping," Emma began, her voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom. "But Marcus was yelling again, and when Marcus yells, bad things happen." She paused, looking at Justice, who remained perfectly still, except for the gentle rise and fall of his breathing. "Mama told me to hide in the closet when the yelling starts, but this time I could hear her crying different. Not sad crying, scared crying." The jury leaned forward as one, captivated by the simple honesty in Emma's voice. In the gallery, several people dabbed at their eyes as the reality of what this child had endured became clear. Marcus said words that made Mama cry more. He called her stupid and worthless. Then I heard the lamp break, the pretty one with flowers that Mama loved. Mitchell guided her gently through the testimony, each question revealing another piece of the horrific puzzle. Emma described Webb's threats with devastating accuracy, recounting specific words and phrases that perfectly matched the evidence collected at the scene. But it was when Kane rose for cross-examination that Emma delivered the moment that would be replayed on news broadcasts around the world. Kane, attempting to maintain his aggressive courtroom persona, despite facing a 3-year-old approached Emma with a question designed to discredit her memory. "Emma, little girls sometimes get confused about what they see. Are you sure you're not mixing up stories from TV shows or movies?" Emma looked at Kane for a long moment, then turned to Justice. The dog's steady gaze seemed to give her strength for what came next. She looked directly at Kane, and in a voice that carried the moral authority of absolute truth, she said, "I'm not confused, and I'm not mixing up stories. Justice knows I'm telling the truth, because dogs can sense when people lie. Marcus hurt my mama, and he said he would hurt me too, if I ever told anyone. But Justice keeps me safe, and he told me that brave people tell the truth even when they're scared." The courtroom erupted in whispers and gasps. Kane stepped back as if physically struck by the simple power of her words. But Emma wasn't finished. She stood up in the witness chair, her small voice carrying across the stunned courtroom. "Marcus is a bad man who hurts people smaller than him. But I'm not scared of him anymore because Justice taught me that truth is stronger than scary people." She pointed directly at Webb, who had gone pale as death. "He can't hurt us anymore because good people and good dogs don't let monsters win." The silence that followed was deafening. Jurors wiped away tears. Hardened court officers swallowed lumps in their throats, and even Kane seemed at a loss for words. Webb buried his face in his hands, knowing that his fate had been sealed by the honest words of a 3-year-old, whose courage had been unlocked by an extraordinary dog. As Emma finished her testimony and walked back to Detective Martinez, Justice rose and walked beside her, his mission accomplished. Together, they had just changed the course of American justice forever. The jury deliberated for exactly 47 minutes, the shortest deliberation in Maricopa County Superior Court history for a felony case of this magnitude. When the buzzer sounded indicating they had reached a verdict, the packed courtroom seemed to collectively hold its breath. Emma sat in the front row with her grandmother Rosa, one small hand resting on Justice's head, while the other clutched a drawing she had made for her mother. A picture of a little girl, a big dog, and the words "We did it," written in purple crayon. Foreman Patricia Chun, a mother of 2, and no relation to Dr. Chun, stood with the gravity of someone who understood the historical weight of this moment. Her voice was steady but emotional as she read the verdict that would echo through legal history. On the charge of aggravated domestic violence, we find the defendant Marcus Webb guilty. On the charge of child endangerment, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of terroristic threatening, we find the defendant guilty. As each guilty verdict rang out, Webb seemed to shrink further into his chair until he appeared to be nothing more than a broken shell of the man who had once terrorized a family through violence and intimidation. When the final count was read guilty, on all 7 charges, Webb broke down completely, sobbing into his hands while his attorney sat in stunned silence. The courtroom erupted in a chaos of emotions. Victim advocates cheered and wept. Legal observers frantically took notes, and news reporters rushed toward the exits to file their stories about the unprecedented conviction. But in the center of it all, Emma Rodriguez sat quietly with Justice, her small face showing a wisdom far beyond her years. Judge Gonzalez banged her gavel repeatedly to restore order, but even her usually stern judicial demeanor cracked as she looked down at the little girl whose courage had made this moment possible. "Mr. Webb," she said, her voice carrying 30 years of judicial authority, "you will be remanded into custody pending sentencing. This court will reconvene in 2 weeks to determine your punishment for the crimes you have committed against this family." As Webb was led away in shackles, he made one final attempt to intimidate his victims, shouting over his shoulder, "This isn't over. You can't keep me locked up forever." But his threats fell on deaf ears. Emma looked up at Justice and said clearly, He's just making noise now. Scary people always make noise when they can't hurt you anymore. The sentencing hearing 2 weeks later drew even more national attention. Legal experts predicted Webb would receive the maximum sentence allowed under Arizona law, and they were not disappointed. Judge Gonzalez sentenced him to 15 years in state prison without the possibility of parole for the first 7 years, the harshest sentence ever handed down for domestic violence in the county. But it was Emma's victim impact statement, delivered with justice by her side, that truly captured the nation's attention. Standing on her special step stool at the podium, she looked directly at Webb one final time and said, "You tried to make me too scared to tell the truth, but justice taught me that brave people speak up when bad things happen. Now other kids will know they can be brave too." The aftermath of the trial was swift and far-reaching. Within 6 months, Emma's law was introduced in the Arizona state legislature, requiring all courts to accommodate facility dogs for child witnesses in trauma cases. The bill passed unanimously in both houses and was signed by the governor in a ceremony attended by Emma, Justice, Detective Martinez, and Dr. Chun. The law quickly spread to other states. California passed similar legislation within a year, followed by Texas, Florida, and New York. Legal scholars began studying what became known as the Rodriguez case in law schools across the country, using it as an example of how the justice system could evolve to better serve its most vulnerable witnesses. Detective Martinez found herself in demand as a speaker at police academies and victim services conferences, often accompanied by Justice, who became something of a celebrity in law enforcement circles. The Phoenix Police Department expanded their facility dog program, training 12 additional dogs to work with traumatized witnesses. Justice, now officially designated as Arizona's first courthouse therapy dog, became the model for facility dog programs across the nation. Dr. Chun published her research on Emma's case in the Journal of Child Psychology, contributing to a growing body of evidence supporting animal-assisted therapy in legal settings. Her paper, titled Unlocking Truth: Facility Dogs and Traumatized Child Witnesses, became one of the most cited works in the field and led to her appointment as director of the new National Center for Child Witness Advocacy. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation was in Emma herself. The silent, traumatized child who had hidden in closets became a confident, articulate little girl who spoke at victim advocacy events alongside Justice. By age 6, she was already expressing her dream of becoming a police officer. So I can help other kids find their voices like Justice helped me find mine. Emma's mother, Maria, made a full recovery from her physical injuries, though the emotional scars took longer to heal. She often spoke about the guilt she felt for not protecting Emma from witnessing the abuse. But Dr. Chun helped her understand that Emma's strength came not from the trauma she experienced, but from the love and safety that surrounded her recovery. Emma didn't become brave because of what happened to her. Maria explained during a television interview on the first anniversary of the trial. She became brave because she learned that there are people and dogs who will stand with you when you're ready to stand up for yourself. 5 years after the trial, Emma Rodriguez, now 8 years old, still maintains her special bond with Justice, who has retired from active duty, but continues to visit schools and courts as an ambassador for the facility dog program. Their story has inspired children's books, documentary films, and countless other young victims to find the courage to speak their truth. The little girl who once hid in closets now dreams of joining the Phoenix Police Department when she grows up, inspired by Detective Martinez and motivated by her belief that everyone deserves to have someone like Justice to help them be brave. In her bedroom hangs a photo from the day of Webb's conviction. Emma standing proudly next to Justice in the courthouse hallway, both of them wearing matching medals of courage from the Arizona Victim Rights Foundation. Below the photo, in Emma's careful handwriting, are the words that became her personal motto. Truth is stronger than fear, and love is stronger than everything. The case that began with a terrified child hiding in a closet had evolved into a national movement that transformed how America's justice system protects its most vulnerable witnesses. Emma Rodriguez and justice had proven that sometimes the most powerful voices belong to those who society might consider the smallest and most powerless. Their legacy lives on in every courthouse, where a facility dog now stands ready to help a frightened child find the courage to speak truth to power, ensuring that Emma's brave words, "Justice keeps me safe, and he knows I'm telling the truth," continue to echo through the halls of justice across America.